Greeting everyone from the Water Pavilion. We've been talking about things about water. Now we're going to be going into the water and talking about things that grow in the water. Welcome to our special COP26 side event on climate action for shared prosperity through aquatic food systems, with a special focus on small island development states and beyond. This event is co-hosted by WorldFish in partnership with IWMI and the FAO. My name is Tana Lala Pritchard. I'm the Executive Director of Strategy, Innovation and Communications at WorldFish, and I'll be moderating today's event. Small island nations are defined by their relationship with the ocean and the related aquatic food systems. The ocean, inland water bodies, and related aquatic food systems play an essential role in the daily lives of millions of people that live in these communities, as well as the diverse island fauna and flora in both land and water. Coastal fisheries generate food and income for rural communities, particularly where formal markets and supply chains function poorly. This is why, together with an extremely distinguished panel of speakers, we will explore a number of questions related to blue prosperity and climate change for small island developing states. But more importantly, we will learn about some exciting innovations that are already happening in this space and discuss an ocean opportunities with triple benefits for people, nature, and the economy. But to warm things up, let us get started very quickly with a video animation that we've prepared on aquatic food systems.
We can't have a healthy planet without well-nourished people consuming diverse and sustainably produced food. At WorldFish, we work with small-scale actors, researchers, and governments towards ensuring a future where the unmatched potential of diverse aquatic foods is sustainably utilised. With research, innovation, policies, and investment in aquatic foods, a sustainable, healthy food system for millions of people could be a reality. From diverse aquatic food systems like the coastal fisheries in Timor-Leste, homestead ponds and wetlands in Bangladesh, to the lakes and rivers of landlocked Zambia, sustainable innovation and management solutions are improving how we catch, grow, harvest, process, market and consume aquatic foods. Aquatic foods are aquatic animals, plants and microorganisms grown in or harvested from water for food or feed, and their synthetic substitutes. For example, finfish like tilapia, shellfish like shrimp, and plants like seaweed. Aquatic foods provide an essential source of protein and micronutrients to the diets of 3.3 billion people and are recognised as a superfood for their nutritional benefits to cognitive development and disease prevention. 800 million people's livelihoods depend on aquatic food systems, especially those in developing countries. The naturally low carbon footprint of aquatic foods adds resilience to communities struck by climate change and makes sustainable aquatic food production a key solution for the future. Currently, among the world's most traded foods, the demand for aquatic foods is increasing. The volume of aquatic food production will reach 204 million tonnes by 2030. Shifting global diets to include more aquatic foods would see transformative improvements for billions of people in developing countries, with improved livelihoods, nutrition, income, and rights for women and young people. Spread the word. Aquatic foods for healthy people and the planet.
For that, Paula. To help set the scene of the discussion with our panelists today, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Essam Yassin Mohammed. He's the Global Lead for Climate and Environmental Sustainability at WorldFish. His work focuses on the economic valuation of environmental goods and services, the connectivity between high seas and territorial waters, as well as the nexus of climate change and food security. He's a member of several advisory bodies, including the group of experts for the second cycle of the regular process for global reporting and assessment of the state of the marine environment of the United Nations. Over to you, Essam, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Tana, for that very kind introduction as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for making the time to come and join us in this very exciting topic for today. We're talking about innovations and other solutions that are out there to help us toward the transition towards a climate resilient aquatic food system. So as we've seen from the animation, from the video, we've noted the significance of aquatic food systems to hundreds of millions of people across the world, but particularly for people in the tropical regions, which is home to the majority of people living in poverty as well. So its cultural, economic, and livelihood and nutritional significance or importance is huge. Nonetheless, these benefits are under significant threat from climate change. And this threat, of course, applies to aquatic foods, but also the people who depend on them. In a recent study from WorldFish and colleagues from Stanford University and a number of other institutions, we found that the majority of aquatic food systems in tropical regions face significant threat if no action is taken today. In a similar another study, we find that profits projected to plummet in low-income countries from both fisheries and aquaculture. But this is assuming we take no action today. Therefore, the most fundamental question is, can we reverse the trend and realize a prosperous future for all? And I believe the answer is yes. And in two ways. One is through mitigation opportunities. There are plenty of mitigation opportunities through sustainable management of aquatic systems. If we were to leave aquatic foods or aquatic plants and animals in the water, if we were to leave some, or at least if we were to utilize them sustainably, and that means hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 that being sequestered through these aquatic plants and animals. So this is a very simple, low-cost mitigation opportunity. If countries could realize their mitigation targets by sustainably managing their aquatic plants and animals and all aquatic resources, then that will be a huge win for the planet. Indeed, it will be a huge win for the people and climate as well. And another one is beyond just the passive sort of mitigation opportunity through sustainable management of aquatic foods, but also that come with innovation as well. For instance, we know for a fact that aquatic food systems emit much lower greenhouse gas emissions relative to land-based food production systems, for instance. And with further innovation, for instance, through the 9th generation tilapia strain in Egypt, for instance, that has demonstrated up to 36% reduction in environmental impacts, including greenhouse gas emissions. And in further innovation, also in a recent assessment, we understand that the use of low fuel gear can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in some fisheries by 61%, while also reducing feed usage and switching to deforestation-free inputs can reduce emissions from aquaculture by a staggering 50%. But at the same time, we need to be able to measure in order to improve it. As a famous saying goes, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And therefore, WorldFish and partners, we've established a new digital platform or tool that enables us to be able to monitor and measure our carbon footprint in our aquatic food systems. And this digital tool is called fishscores.com that I'm sure you'll be able to check and have a look at how the digital tool works. These are the mitigation opportunities only, but also there is a huge resilience opportunity as well. For instance, in order to realize shared blue prosperity under changing climate, we believe there are 4 points that we need to emphasize. One is we need to be able to reduce vulnerabilities by reducing risk and exposure to hazard, enhance people's ability to predict or anticipate climate hazard, but also enhance capacity to respond and increase ability of viable livelihood opportunities as well. Just to give you a few examples, an investment through hard-earned cash in Bangladesh in order to sustainably manage a Hilsa fishery in Bangladesh, for instance, yields for every dollar invested by the government, it yields about $11. Similarly, in Myanmar, $1 invested in sustainable management of fishery also yields, in terms of benefit to population, to the country and the economy, up to 9 times. And in terms of increasing people's ability to predict or anticipate climate hazard is very key. Many fish farmers lose about 30% of their produce due to climate-imposed risks. So this is mainly because farmers do not have the access to predict the climate variability over the next, let's say, few days, for instance. And imagine how much difference it would make if they would have access to a more authentic, localized, and timely, and actionable, and simple climate informative services. And to this end, we have also developed a digital tool which enables fish farmers to have access to be able to predict the weather variability over the next few days, but also be able to respond as well effectively. And similarly, we don't necessarily only work on new technological innovations or new practices, but also we tap on some traditional and indigenous knowledge as well. For instance, the rice fish systems in Cambodia and Myanmar. And these are fantastic practices which have been now replaced with monoculture, but WorldFish is working with partners to undo that practice and to propagate this rice and fish water systems where you're able to enhance water and land use efficiency, reduce climate-induced risks, and they are highly adaptable to diverse fish species, and they help rehabilitate degraded landscapes as well. And households who have taken part in these fish rice systems have seen their annual income increase by up to 60% in Cambodia and Myanmar. Now, indeed, the point I'm trying to make here is aquatic food systems offer us a sea of opportunities to turn the tide on climate change and realize a shared prosperity for all. However, for this to happen, they must be underpinned by respecting ecological or planetary boundaries and eliminating all systemic barriers to market and non-market services, and ensuring social and economic inclusion, and making sure there is predictable and sustainable financing, and also effective governance. And if we do all that, we genuinely believe it's possible to transition towards to realize a shared blue prosperity under changing climate for all. Therefore, my call for action are a few points. One is, let's make sustainable, nature-positive aquatic foods a key part of our nationally determined contributions, because that's an easy win for governments and for all actors involved. Include aquatic food ecosystems, infrastructure, workers, and assets in national adaptation plans and disaster preparedness and relief strategies. And let's remember, the transition to a low-carbon aquatic food-based diets must ensure those who are furthest behind benefit most, ensuring no one is left behind. With that, I wish you a very successful event, and thank you very much, Tana. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Essam, for helping set the scene. I think you've provided a lot of aquatic food for thought, which we'll explore with the panelists, but totally agree with your point there about, really making food systems part of the climate action agenda. I think it's time that, we did that. But now let me go over to our first panelist. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to Dr. Nabil Mohammed Abu AlFath, who is the Undersecretary for Agriculture and Marine Resources in Bahrain. Dr. AlFath oversees the integration of national efforts and development strategies of agriculture and marine sectors set by the government of Bahrain. His work includes streamlining sustainability goals and good agricultural practices across all sectors in Bahrain. Welcome, Dr. Nabil, and thanks for joining us today. As we just heard from Essam, there are multiple benefits to climate mitigation and adaptation associated with more research and investment in aquatic food systems, including fisheries and aquaculture. And these can help deliver these triple wins for nature, people, and the climate. Now, we also understand that the government of Bahrain has been mainstreaming aquatic food systems, including fisheries aquaculture, in its national climate mitigation and adaptation plans. So can you tell us a little bit more about these, and why is Bahrain prioritizing fisheries and aquaculture for climate action?
Good evening to you. Actually, it's good evening in Bahrain. I think it's good afternoon in Glasgow. First of all, I'm delighted really to join you on this panel, and would like to highlight some of the issues that the government has been handling lately concerning food security and aquaculture. 2 years ago, His Majesty the King of Bahrain instructed the government to start hydroponic and aquaculture projects in Bahrain. Since then, we engaged the FAO to be with us to support us in revising our strategies in agriculture and in sea or the fish industry. Bahrain is an island actually, and 50% of our consumption of the fish is from natural harvesting, and the other 50% comes from importing fish from our neighbors and from other channels all over the world. Actually, we started a project in an area called Ras Hayyan, where this project was there for the last 15 years, but it was not boosted enough or enhanced or injected with money enough to grow as we anticipated for. At the moment, we are investing more than 5 million dinar. That's almost $13 million in that project. What we are trying to do, first of all, is to enhance the infrastructure of such industry. For fish fingers and production, we were producing actually 170,000 annually. There was a plan this year to reach 2 million fish fingers. Fortunately, we reached 2 until now. We are planning to go for 3 million next year, 5 million by 23, and then we'll have a new hatchery that will produce more than 20 million fish finger annually. At the moment, with the arrangement we have, we can enhance the production in aquaculture 12% of our needs. And by next year, we will be producing 12% of our need in Bahrain. That will reach us to 60% of the consumption in Bahrain. But by the year 2024, when our new hatchery is ready, we will be producing 20 million. To secure this investment, we have provided 20 plots inland and 4 plots in sea for investors to come and invest in such investment, because we will produce the fish fingers, and the rest of the project will be handed to the private sectors. In the same time, we implemented or established a training center for all the youth who are interested to enter this field. At the moment, we trained 15 already. We have 150 people also who are interested to enter this field. We leased more than 15 lands of the 20 lands, and very soon we'll have all those lands be taken by investors, and their projects will be starting by next year. Once we have those 20 plots all hired, we will produce, as I said, 12% of our national need in Bahrain. Once we reach 20 million, we need double the area of those land we hired, and double the area also in the sea. And as we planned, by 2027, we will produce 45% of our local needs of fish. And that's a big jump, but we are really optimistic and we think we can achieve it by introducing the people who are interested, whether they are youth or investors that are willing to come into this field. At the moment, as I said, we have 15 trainees. We have incubators also. We give them the incubators and they are starting these projects in the incubators. So, and we're trying to let them train the other people who are interested to come in this field. So the project is moving steadily. And as I said, we are investing money in it, but still a lot of investors are willing to come to Bahrain from Saudi Arabia, from United Arab Emirates. And we are, as I'm talking, we have more than $100 million investors that are willing to come and invest in Bahrain. It's an open opportunity. Besides all of this, the government is giving aid for all people who are entering this field. Mm-hmm. We have an enabler agency which is called Tamkeen Bahrain, and whomever is interested to enter this field, if they think that this project is feasible and the people who are committed their interest are really reliable and could achieve something, they go up to 50% support for these companies. So, as I said, we have an ambitious plan, and by 2024, our new hatchery will be ready, and we will start producing the 20 million fingers. Part of it will be utilized in our country. The rest will be exported to our neighbors because there is a demand in most of GCC countries, Gulf Arab countries, and I think this is good to sustain our food security system, mm-hmm. plus helping our neighbors to enter in this field.
Absolutely. Definitely. It sounds quite ambitious and very exciting and sort of really encouraging to see sort of the commitment of the government of Bahrain. Particularly, I like, the focus that you are putting on sort of engaging younger people in the sector and sort of really making the sector more attractive, but also the other point that you raised about partnership with the private sector, which needs to be a critical actor here in making these commitments happening. Thank you so much for sharing that wonderful success story with us. I would like to now move to Felix Martin, who is the Fisheries Resource Officer for Inland Fisheries at FAO. Felix works center on the assessment, development and management of inland fisheries through an ecosystem approach to ensure inclusive stakeholder participation and engagement. And he also supports implementation of the voluntary guidelines for small-scale fisheries, which in particular highlight the rights of fishers and fish workers. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Felix. To the point of Dr. Nabil about engaging a lot of stakeholders, but also to the point that, Essam raised earlier about ensuring justice and equity and ensuring that a lot of people, or at least the ones that need the most benefit from these transformative actions related to climate change and also fisheries and aquaculture sector. So can you tell us a little bit more in terms of what are some good examples of good practices out there that, FAO and government actors are working to sort of really ensure that these are inclusive and reflective of the needs, priorities, and the aspirations of local communities, particularly those that depend on aquatic food system sector?
That's a lot. I will try to do my best to talk a bit about that. But first of all, as the previous speakers said, I'm very thankful that I can be here, that I can make my point. As Tana said already, I'm Felix Martin. I'm a Fishery Resources Officer of the FAO. Sorry. And I do do feel a bit like the odd man out in this panel, as I will be dealing with the beyond in the title of the event. I will be dealing with inland fisheries. Aquatic food systems, including these inland fisheries, can be a solution for climate change mitigation and adaptation. In this talk, I will give a bit more insight into how this can be realized. I will first explain what inland fisheries are, who are involved, and the role inland fisheries play with respect to food security and nutrition. I will touch upon the factors which are influencing inland fisheries and the effects climate change have on inland fisheries, and how these effects can be mitigated and sometimes are mitigated already. And then I will stress the importance of including the fishery sector wherever programs are being discussed impacting water management, be it in irrigation, flood protection, or hydropower, to name a few, and which were also discussed in previous sessions. First of all, a quick explanation on what inland fisheries are. Basically, they are all capture fisheries, so catching of fish, not taking place in the sea. You can find these fisheries in rivers, streams, deltas, floodplains, swamps, flooded forests, peatlands, ponds, lakes, rice fields, man-made reservoir, you name it. Many different people are engaged in the sector. The inland fisheries sector is very diffuse, mostly small scale, but there are also industrial scale fisheries, like for instance the Nile perch fishery in Lake Victoria or the dye fishery in the Mekong River. As you can see from the pictures, the gears being used are also very diverse. Another characteristic of inland fisheries is that many people fish as part of their diverse livelihood. They can be farmers, pastoralists, laborers, and others. Only a small part of the people that are fishing fishes as their main livelihood. At least 50 million people in the world are directly involved in inland fisheries, and at least 200 million people are dependent on, for their livelihoods on inland fisheries. Now, apart from fishing, the aquatic resources the fishers depend on are influenced by many factors outside these fishers' control. You can see here from source to sea the different impacts that can influence the production of the fisheries. Examples are pollution, poor land management, river fragmentation, non-native species or alien species or invasive species as people call them, draining of wetlands for agriculture, habitat loss. It's just a few. The impacts of climate change on inland fisheries are difficult to predict. What we do know is that there will be more extreme weather events resulting in flooding and drought. We also know that the average temperature will increase. Some of the impacts of climate change on inland fisheries can be reduced connectivity in a river, increased flooding, changing rainfall patterns, temperature fluctuations, and much more. More information on the impacts of climate change on inland fisheries and aquaculture can be found in the FAO Fisheries and Aquaculture Technical Paper 627. To mitigate climate change, there are a few things that can be done. I will only name a few in the interest of time. Connectivity is very important for inland fisheries, as are flooding patterns and habitats. The first thing to do to increase the resilience of people, in other words, the fishery sector, is to make sure that connectivity of rivers and floodplains continues to exist and flooding patterns are not drastically changed. Additional measures could be construction of refuges in rice fields or flooded areas. Also, habitat restoration is a very important action which will increase the resilience of a fishery. Another example could be that if irrigation reservoirs are made, also refuges for fish are constructed. I think the picture is clear. Then real-life examples. If flood protection is constructed, these infrastructures could be designed in such a way that fisheries are less impacted. Here you see two examples of such infrastructures. The picture on the left, where the infrastructure allows fish to migrate upstream, ensuring the connectivity of the river. The picture on the right is a sluice gate with overshot sluice gates. Overshot sluice gates allow water to flow over the doors when they are lowered, against the normal practice to lift sluice gate door to allow water to flow through the flood protection structure. Research has shown that migrating fingerlings migrating from upstream to downstream have a greater chance of survival with these overshot sluice gates. Then something important. A very pertinent question which goes beyond fisheries would be, what kind of alternative energy will we be using to replace fossil fuels? One that comes to mind related to inland fisheries or rivers would be hydropower. However, often not all costs of this hydropower and the effect these dams have on people depending on the river are included in evaluations. Dams block migration routes of fish, affecting not only the productivity but also the biodiversity. They also change flooding patterns, which may have an effect on reproduction cycles of fish. It might be therefore worthwhile, especially in tropical areas, to compare the cost of hydropower and its impact on the livelihoods of people around the river to, for instance, solar power. Then, if hydropower is considered, mitigation measures need to be taken to ensure at least part of the river's connectivity and manage water flows in such a way that the flooding patterns follow normal flooding. Here you see the picture of a dam with, on the right hand, in the yellow circle, a fish ladder, which at least allows some fish to migrate upstream. So, solutions are there, ensuring that fishers can continue supporting their livelihoods and food security and nutrition. However, the most important message I would like to give here is that fishers need to have a place at the table when water management decisions are taken. In previous sessions, I have heard people talking about all stakeholders except fishers. Fishers are very much dependent on water and water management. The interests of fishers are important and often forgotten. Inland fisheries support the livelihoods of more than 200 million people who have no or limited alternatives. Let's not forget the fishers this time. Fishers need to be and are part of the solution. Before closing, I would like to thank my colleagues Simon van Smith and Gianluigi Nico for their help getting this presentation together. Thank you very much. And back to you, Tana.
Thank you so much, Felix. I think your presentation really sort of illustrates the interconnectivity of what happens in land and water, and sort of really looking at, from the food systems approach, looking to sort of take the kind of actions that not only deliver on the climate goals, but also on these other sustainable development goals with regards to, equity, gender equality, people's rights, and nutrition, and hunger, and so forth. And speaking of nutrition and public health, I would like now to go over to Shakuntala Latilstadt, who is the World Food Prize winner for this year for her groundbreaking scientific work at the intersection of nutrition, fish, and aquatic food systems. She's also won the 2021 Aral Food Innovation Award. Shakuntala, congratulations on these achievements. It is quite clear that aquatic food systems are having their moment in the spotlight thanks to the work and the advocacy that you've been doing and sort of putting some of these issues at the table. But help us a little bit more understand the connection of aquatic food systems to the climate change agenda. How can we sort of see that research innovation in aquatic food systems is critical to blue prosperity as we work to address the climate crisis?
Thank you so much, Tanu, and thank you for inviting me to make some remarks on aquatic foods, food and nutrition security, and climate change. And as we have heard, aquatic foods are an integral part of the diets of 3.3 billion people in small island states, large island states, and peoples in general across the world. But for the poor and vulnerable whose diets depend on having nutritious foods to secure food and nutrition security, we would like to see that aquatic foods play a much more important part in their diets, leaving no one behind. We do know that aquatic foods play a key role in creating healthier, low-carbon, climate-resilient food systems, and the diversity of aquatic foods are important. Animals, plants, and microorganisms, because this diversity offers opportunities to explore both the synergies and build resilience in mitigating climate change. Aquatic foods have lower carbon footprints than many terrestrial animal source foods. And diverse aquatic foods from many diverse waters, both marine and inland, have low or negative greenhouse gas emissions. So there is a direct link between aquatic foods as superfoods and aquatic foods in climate change. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the production of diverse aquatic foods can be increased and contribute even further to food and nutrition security without having negative impacts on our planet. And aquatic foods, up till now, even though we have won these prizes, are often overlooked in policies and solutions for agriculture and food and nutrition security, as well as those related to climate change. However, we must use the evidence that aquatic foods, diverse aquatic foods, can contribute to sustainable solutions for some of the challenges that we face globally with climate change. Let me give one example. At WorldFish, we have shown that farming systems that integrate diverse fish species and rice result in smallholder households having a more resilient system, generating both income and nutritious foods from both fish and rice and also vegetables. And at the same time, these systems can safeguard and manage the enormous diversity of aquatic foods. And therefore, the system can generate even more income and more nutritious foods for all people. Food loss and waste within the global food system is a big challenge that we must tackle in order to meet the 2030 agenda for sustainability and efficient use of our planet's resources. Many aquatic foods, like small fish and seaweeds, can be included in aquatic food systems and in food systems in general, and these have low loss and waste. Aquatic foods, we know, are superfoods for the multiple micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids that they provide. And these superfoods are essential for cognition, growth, and development of young children, and for the health and well-being of their mothers. Thus, we must ensure investments that make available and de-risk and build the capacity and resilience of aquatic food systems in the face of climate change. You've heard me say in all my points that diversity is fundamental for ensuring the full potential of aquatic foods for mitigating climate change. And we must shift away from traditional aquatic foods and just not only think about fish, crustaceans, and bivalves, but also include aquatic microorganisms such as seaweeds, because we do know that they have a potential to mitigate climate change, low carbon food production systems. So we must also include, for example, seaweeds as a superfood, which is rich in multiple micronutrients and essential fatty acids, as well as have little impact on climate change. So policies and investments decisions must take into account these novel aquatic foods. And in conclusion, therefore, sustainable, nature-positive aquatic foods must be a key part of the national determined contributions and the national adaptation programs of action that we are discussing in this COP26. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shakuntala, for those really strong messages. I want to unpack in particular this message around the fact that, aquatic food systems traditionally have been overlooked. And I wonder whether that has to do with money. So for that particular question, I would like to sort of go to our next panelist, Ambassador Roni Jumeau, who's the former cabinet minister and ambassador of the Republic of Seychelles to the United Nations, the US, and Canada. great champion of small island developing states. He serves on the board of the Green Climate Fund for Small Island Developing States and currently is the chair of the Global Sustainable Energy and Climate Resilience Organization for SIDS. As a private consultant, Ambassador Jomo provides advice to both governments and civil organizations on issues of climate change, conservation, sustainable development, the ocean and the blue economy in the islands. Welcome, Ambassador Jomo, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much, and for the invitation to address this event. Yes, we are doing some very exciting things in Seychelles, which was born out of a challenge that many small islands face. And you'll hear small islands talk about the issue of finance,
right.
Whether it's climate finance, development finance. Up to 2019, small islands had got only 2% of the climate finance that had been shared out. And that is because many of us are middle income to upper income. And even those which are parts of the least developed countries, the LDCs, are fast transitioning out. So we have this problem where people tell us, you cannot have grants, you cannot have concessional financing, you have to go on the market for loans, and the result is the small islands are amongst the most highly indebted countries in the world, and some of us are facing ruin now because of COVID-19.
Right.
So how do we help the small fishers? How do we help people who want to invest? Because our two main engines of our economy are marine-based tourism and fisheries. Now, the big industrial fleets, which are not necessarily that good for us, but we have to tolerate them, they get their financing. Where does the little fisher get his financing? So what Seychelles did, it pioneered what we call our blue finance system. It is two-pronged. At first, we did the Seychelles, the first debt swap for the ocean that any country has done. And that was to raise financing to protect 30% of our ocean space. Seychelles' EEZ is so big that 30% of our ocean space is bigger than Japan or Germany. And that's run by a country of nearly 8,000 people. That remains left 70% for sustainable use, development. And this is where we teamed up with World Bank, which is normally associated with poverty alleviation and eradication, the Global Environment Fund, the Global Environment Fund, to launch the blue bonds. Now, the blue bonds, it was modest, $15 million, because of the fiscal space that we can to absorb it. It's divided in what we call blue grants and blue loans. The blue grants are run by the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, which was set up to run the proceeds of the debt swap. And what that allows is that it allows fishers to get grants to pioneer new things, new models of business in the fisheries sector, in the sustainable fisheries sector. And the interesting thing is the way it is run is that the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, SECAT, runs workshops to help people getting the grants to write their grant project.
Right.
So if you're a fisher and you're not used to it, they can write a consultant into your project for you. They have workshops for women, workshops for youth. More than 50% of the grants are to women. 33% are to the youth. And when you use these grants to pioneer business models, if it works out, usually some money that you would have to borrow, you can then go and apply for a blue loan. So you get a grant to prepare your project. I'll give an example of some of the grants, what they're doing with. There's a $1 million grant for a small-scale research and development trial hatchery for the propagation of juvenile sea cucumbers for subsequent use in sustainable commercial production. This is multi-pronged. Sea cucumbers are a big export in Seychelles. They are overfished. So as well as providing livelihoods and export, we are also providing a way so that if we can do commercial production, aquacultural production of sea cucumbers, we can then move to protect it without affecting livelihoods. The same people go into this sort of business. There's another $1 million grant for a feasibility study to determine the economic viability to operate a rock oyster farm for commercial purposes in Seychelles. What you just talked about, a feasibility study on the potential contribution of seaweed cultivation across sectors in Seychelles. Another one to introduce a Seychelles Sustainable Seafood Initiative. And all these are grants. So because normally in Seychelles, if you're in the tourism sector, it's easy for you to get a loan. If you're in the fisheries, and I think that's around the world, if you're in fisheries, and especially if you're artisanal and domestic fisheries, it's sometimes impossible to get a loan. So this was designed at the same time, but there's a condition. When fishers or other people come to us the grants, or the loan especially, they said, on condition you use sustainable practices. You must list this. Right. You're not forced to do it. If you don't want to do it, you're free to go to a commercial bank, and no one will do them. So we're using these incentives to transition the fisheries not only into a more sustainable practice, but into new areas that will take pressure of the stocks that they have through traditional practices.
Thank you so much for that. I want to follow up with a quick question. You mentioned, there are examples of some bad financing out there. For example, there are fishery subsidies that have a perverse impact on both people and the environment. And some have estimated that this kind of are valued at 35 billion annually. How do we restructure or reconfigure these financing mechanisms so that it doesn't have those perverse impacts?
Obviously, Seychelles and SIDS are amongst the countries that are complaining about the subsidies. And one of the things we are trying to propose to countries is we're not asking you to stop subsidies. You can redirect subsidies to help the people who need it to have a more sustainable fishery. Because now we're talking of subsidies for renewable energy to get it off the ground.
Right.
So there are people who want to do new ways of doing things, more sustainable ways of doing things that affect livelihoods. They don't get the financing. If they could get a portion of that subsidies, the largest European Union tuna fleet outside of Europe is in Seychelles, 42 purseaners. We could do a bit less of that. If they came into more sustainable business models with us, which would enable and empower us in that sector and would still supply the European market.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you for that. I'm opening up now with a few sort of follow-up questions. I'm sure we could talk about it all day, but we have a few minutes to explore some questions with the panelists. So I want to pick on what Essam said earlier about this 30% loss in the fishery sector that's there. And I guess, you can also look at it as an opportunity. And so this is probably a question to both, either Essam or Shakuntala, whoever is bold enough to take it. What are some innovative ways in which we can actually help reduce loss and waste in the sector and perhaps, even couple it with some of this innovative financing kind of mechanisms? And how do we ensure that, vulnerable communities, as Shakuntala mentioned, women and children in particular, have access to affordable, convenient fish and aquatic food products that are also safe to consume? So who wants to go first? Essam, you want to take that first?
Sure. I'm happy to go. Okay, thank you very much. You raised a very good point, Tana. Quick response to that. One is a matter of semantics. I think I've been having a problem for quite some time now with the use of the word waste and loss. And I think that's literally because our perception when it comes to that, because we usually undervalue it. Because if this quote unquote waste and loss, for instance, was utilized to produce feed for aquaculture, for instance, or as fertilizer for our agricultural produce, for instance, they would have value. I think there is latent, hidden value within this quote unquote waste and loss in our food system. Having said that, it doesn't mean we don't need to reduce our waste and loss. We definitely need to. As I mentioned earlier, of course, one is on fish handling. That's one of the main causes where there is an intervention that's desperately needed. But I would like to mention also one of the major causes that we see now is, particularly with fish farming, is to do with the climate variability, where climate variability is leading to making up almost the 30% of the food waste and loss. among aquaculture farmers or fish farmers is due to climate variability. And this is based on a scientific evidence that we did in Bangladesh and elsewhere. And therefore, helping communities to be able to predict weather patterns over the next few days and to provide the advisory services in order to enable them to avoid those losses would have sort of huge impact in reducing food waste and loss in the production system. But also we have examples from the Solomon Islands, for instance, where we have solar freezers, for instance, that are managed by women groups in the Solomon Islands, for instance, that use solar-powered freezers in order to reduce this very perishable commodity, which is aquatic food, from wasting. But at the same time, having said that, I'm sure Shakuntala will have an awful lot of experience that she would like to share with us in terms of how we tackle that.
Shakuntala?
Point on this. And fundamental, it's diversity. And we heard from the Seychelles about the diversity of the production systems, having sea cucumbers, the oysters, seaweeds. And if we would look at the diversity of the products that we have from aquatic systems and use the diversity to tie it in with traditional knowledge and the traditional ways of using foods, we can get to the point where we have very less loss and waste and much more of the foods being used as foods for human beings. If we take the examples we have from Asia and also Africa with small fish products, which are dried and where you use all of the fish. And now with seaweed, which is really the up-and-coming thing, these are two very good examples where loss and waste is extremely low and where most of the product is used for human food. So diversity of systems, diversity of aquatic foods, diversity of preparation methods, they all lead to less loss and waste. Thank you.
And I think one more final question that I want to throw at the panel. So obviously, if some of you, many of you probably been coming to these COPs for a while, and it's interesting to see that, we've really been talking about the ocean space and agriculture and food systems in really recent years in the context of climate change. And so the question that I have is Seychelles gets it, Bahrain gets it, but how do we get, other decision makers at national and global levels to sort of pay attention and understand that climate action does really require interventions and research and innovation in this sort of aquatic food system space, including fisheries and aquaculture? Like what can others learn from the Bahrain experience or the Seychelles experience?
Well, this is my 13th COP. And one thing I always say, from small islands come big ideas.
Right.
What we've seen over the years is that no supposedly rich developed country has a monopoly on ideas anymore.
Absolutely.
In many cases, we know what we want to do. Mm-hmm. We just didn't have the financing. When the financing didn't come, we came up with a bright idea. There are a lot of bright ideas out there. I think we should open it up more to people who feel at a disadvantage, mm-hmm. and can come with these sort of ideas. I mean, we are no more intelligent than anybody else, but because we have fewer people to think about the same thing, mm-hmm. we are forced to diversify in our thinking. We are forced, and I think this is what's happening. Look at a lot of the ideas coming out in the COP now. They're not coming from big developed countries. They're coming from the global south.
Facing the real issue.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. You are forced to find an answer to your problem when instead of getting big countries who come and tell you what they think is an answer, and very often end you up in a bigger mess.
Right. Shakuntala, it seems like you want to follow that up with a few comments?
I do think also platforms and partnerships are extremely important. You have shown that. And if you would take, for example, the experiences we have from the Seychelles, and you would look, for example, at CARICOM, the Caribbean small islands, mm-hmm. and you'd look at the ACP countries, Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific, there's a wealth of ideas and innovations that you can get together around around having the right platforms and partnerships.
Right. But what kind of incentives can we put in place, particularly with regards to partnerships that cross different sectors, not just the public and private, but also different sectors? You know, I'm sure, you know, the fisheries and transport and energy and all that stuff, you know, this is you know, the climate is sort of that common thing that brings us together, right?
What Seychelles has found is if you have the ambition and the boldness to come up with things that people aren't thinking about in a way that they don't expect you to think, you'd be surprised how people line up to be part of the story.
Right.
Ever since we went into that, we have not lacked for partners, and especially in the philanthropic sector. They say, oh my God, I never expected. We're a small island developing state, but we think like a big ocean state,
Right.
like a boss.
Right.
And we always say, don't judge us, small islands say, don't judge us by the size of our population, judge us by the size of our ambition.
Right.
Once you come with this bold thinking, in their face thinking, you get people like you saying, listen to these people, they have bright ideas. And you'd be surprised how much you generate. For example, the debt swap, we're generating another round of financing to complete the work we did. And it's people who have been with us says, oh, we have to join this.
Right.
We have to join this. And that's why we've done something very bold in the NDC. We have committed here in COP26 to protect 100% of our seagrasses and mangroves by 2030. That has a lot of indirect co-benefits for fisheries,
Absolutely.
livelihoods. It's just you know, and exactly. And people said, wow. So we use what we know best.
Absolutely.
And try to convince others that they can do the same thing as well.
Yeah, and I would actually add to that, don't judge the small island nations by, you know, the small size of their land, but the large ocean territories that they have and the breadth and the depth
and
of
the
the
potential
ideas.
that has.
Absolutely. I think what a wonderful kind of note to sort of conclude this panel discussion. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for. But to wrap things up, I would like to invite Dr. Gareth Johnston for closing remarks. He's the Director General of WorldFish, serves in the steering committee of the World Economic Forum on Sustainable Aquaculture to 2030, and is the Senior Director for Aquatic Food Systems in the 1CGIAR. Over to you, Gareth.
Thank you, Tana. Ambassador Jamal, this is my first COP, so I've got a long way to go. So it's your 13. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in around the world. It's been a fascinating discussion. A big thank you also for IWMI for hosting us, our colleagues and friends over at the International Water Management Institute. And thanks also for the UN FAO for co-hosting this event with us. I think the key here is climate action for shared prosperity. It's the prosperity factor. Our colleague Essam Mohammed mentioned that loss and waste is something he's uncomfortable with. I think it's really we should be looking at prosperity through loss and waste, and that's an important part. Thanks also for all the panelists that spoke. I suppose we've heard today about large ocean states and also about coastal states. Our colleague from UN FAO was talking very much about inland and landlocked states that are a part of the inland fisheries, which is an important component of everything we discuss and around aquatic foods and water. I suppose climate action for shared prosperity requires action on aquatic foods in order to deliver the triple benefits both for nature, the climate and for people, and to put our food systems on a low emissions pathway. And I think it's important that can actually recoup a lot of the impacts that we have. And the collaboration, we talked about partnerships, very important. That collaboration, collective action involves multiple players and actors and partners. We have examples here, both international and national governments, research organizations and institutions, and the private sector with very creative public-private partnerships to put our food systems on this low-emission pathway. And we've heard also that aquatic foods are superfoods. They're important both for nutrition. We've heard also that they're important in terms of emitting low greenhouse gases relative to land-based food systems. Acts as important carbon sinks, and importantly for our colleague in Bahrain, talking about increasing the production will result in employment. Large volumes of folk work in aquatic foods, vulnerable folk including women, youth, indigenous populations and communities. So with sustainability and inclusivity at its heart, research and innovation in aquatic food systems can unlock multiple wins across many of the Sustainable Development Goals, meaning that we cannot continue to neglect aquatic foods in climate-related policies. We've heard that it's very important for nationally determined contributions and national adaptation programs of action, more increasingly in the blue funding protocols and policies. So we really need to wake up to the multiple opportunities that aquatic foods offer to address malnutrition, lower the environmental footprint of the food system, and provide livelihoods to millions of people living in poverty if we are to realize the full potential of a shared blue prosperity. Thanks everybody. It's been a pleasure listening to all the discussion. Thank you also to the moderator, Nabil AlFath, for stimulating and provoking discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks also to the audience that are joining us virtually. Do make sure that you subscribe to our newsletter, www.worldfishcenter.org, where you will be receiving the event recording and other post-event materials. Wishing you all a wonderful day or evening ahead. Thank you.